following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. It's time once again for another Bubbleheads episode of It's Not Therapy. The last Bubblehead series we did was super popular. I'm glad you guys like them as much as I do. And we've got back to talk about conflict. We've got Jake, Aquila, and Merryjest. Moi Moi couldn't make it this time. We are very sad. But guys, welcome back. We're talking about conflict. We're doing another workshop about healthy conflict. But today, we're going to talk about sort of our histories with conflict and what we've learned the hard way. And I'm sure we'll get into some of the other stuff. But the sort of personal approach, I find works. I find it more approachable for everybody. So we'll just sort of start. You can briefly reintroduce yourselves and start with conflict. Now let's start with Merryjest because he is in the car right now. So we'll just stick a pin in that, and the audio will sound a little bit filtered, but that's okay. So Merryjest, where do you sort of come to the table regarding conflict, your background with conflict? And I mean, you're in the opera world, so this is going to be real.
My husband is, I can see him just laughing or trying very hard not to laugh. He's shaking his head with this knowing smile. And so a bit of background. I was raised in Ecuador, very fiery Latin country, but also I was raised by a mother who was about she was almost 3 feet tall. She was teeny and she weighed almost nothing. Okay, this story will kind of give you an idea of where I come from. There was policemen in Ecuador, especially the traffic police, are very, very famous for harassing female drivers. Big surprise. And one of them tried to get into something with my mother just because she was parked in front of my school waiting to pick me up. I must have been like 6. And he threatened to take her driver's license away for no reason. And he ordered her to give it to him. And eventually, after arguing back and forth, she got angry. She said, "Here." And she threw her driver's license to the floor. The man bent over to pick it up, and she opened the door. Then my mother jumped out of the car like Spider-Man, landed on top of him, and started slapping the living crap out of him. And that's the point where I come out. To be picked up. So I see my mother slapping the ever-living crap out of this sexist on the street. And at the same time, there's workers working on the phone lines, up in the air, and they're cheering for my mom at this point. And then my mom looks at me, sees me, she runs over, grabs me, puts me in the car, and we drive off, and this man chases us for like 20 blocks. Eventually, she manages to get to the house, and we just stay there. The story doesn't end it doesn't end there though, because the man parked across from the house and waited until my father came back home. So my father comes in, the traffic cop goes over and talks to him. And so next thing I hear, my father is calling for my mother. And so she comes, I follow to listen in. And my father says, "This man says you assaulted him, etc., etc. Is this true?" And my mother says, "Oh, yes, I did. I hit him. Did he tell you what he said to me?" And so she goes into a detailed retelling of what happened. And so at this point, my father has turned red. He turns towards the traffic cop, and then he starts chasing him through the house because he wants to punch him. And so this turns basically literally into a Benny Hill skit where there's the cop is running around. My dad is running after him. My mom is running after them. The reason the cop can't get out is because this is Ecuador, and we don't have doors that just close and lock. We have a grate, a wrought iron grate that you have to open with a key. So that takes time. So during this whole thing, my grandmother goes up to the door and she unlocks the door. And when the door is finally open, she yells at the guy, and the guy gets out and drives away. And that's the last we ever heard of him.
I'm not
So
sure where that story fits on the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. I'm trying to Ecuador just breaks the model right off the top.
and so that gives you an idea of what kind of conflict I grew up in. My mother was the kind of person who was not terribly diplomatic when someone had crossed a line. And if you had crossed the line, she would basically rake you over the coals. And if you essentially tried to abuse any authority or power, she would probably slap you.
Yeah, that it must have been a real culture shock when you got to America after that.
Yes. Well, first of all, I was very aware that in the Benny Hill skit that I played out would not have happened in the United States. Uh, but it's a very different thing in Ecuador. The police are hopelessly corrupt, and some people will say there's a lot of corruption in the police in the United States. Yes, but not to the level that you see in Ecuador. It's like rot from top to bottom, where cops will fight to ask you for a bribe out in the open. There's no shame anymore. And so when you grow up in that kind of an environment, when you realize, you kind of live knowing that there is no such thing as any reliable authority that can help you when you're facing either a threat or a type of of extreme injustice. You kind of learn to be conflictive because it is a matter of survival.
Yeah,
And
I guess that would fit into the competing style.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. There's nothing to cooperate with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a kind of it's a hostile environment. And of course it's in some ways it's different in the United States. But because of how I grew up, I am very much outright with my approach to conflict, which at times is advantageous, but at other times it is a hindrance because I forget that I am not in Ecuador sometimes. And so, of course, part of that survival skill is that you stand on your on your principles and you stay in your position and you push and you keep pushing. And while that might be potentially helpful when, say, when doing civic activism, pushing against unjust laws and things of that sort, when it comes to interpersonal conflict, that's not very helpful.
I can only be pushed so far.
Was that Asher?
That was Asher.
You may recognize Asher from a previous show. Asher is Merryjest's husband. He's in the car with him. Okay, well, Merryjest is going to be very honest because his husband's right there. I realized while you were talking, every single one of us is operating under certain stereotypes regarding anger and aggression and conflict. And so, because I mean, we got two gingers. Aquila, do you prefer mixed race or how do you prefer to identify? I forget.
Biracial, please.
Biracial. There we go. Biracial. So let's move over to you and your history with conflict, because a lot of what Merryjest said probably felt kind of familiar, but with a pivot.
See, what had happened was. Okay, so full disclosure, I grew up in a biracial household. My mother is Black. My father is 100% Irish. And he was actually a ginger. So I also grew up with an older brother. He's 22 months older than me. So I had to literally fight to establish my own person. Because at school, up until he graduated, because we went to the same high school, I was always known as his little brother. Full disclosure again, I'm trans. So there was that. I had to fight to be to actually claim my own identity as biracial, because there were a significant number of people at my school, predominantly Black, who insisted that I identify as Black and only as Black. And that continued into my college years. And then I joined the Army, and I had to, fighting was my job. My first 7 years in the Army was artillery. And that compounded a notional strategy of scorched earth. If you're going to get into a fight with someone, destroy them unapologetically. And unfortunately, I drank a little too much of the Kool-Aid. Now, this is on top of just not liking it when people attempt to exercise authority over me that they didn't really have. So that's really one of my conflict triggers. If you go there with me, there's no argument, there's no question. It's, oh, you want to put me in this box that I don't fit into. Well, I'm going to fly the one finger salute, and I'm going to go for the jugular. No questions asked, no apologies. It's, I'm going to nuke you and your grid square. Grid square is 1 square kilometer. That's my mentality. I'm trying to get out of that. My mother was notoriously unapologetic about how she either engaged in or didn't engage in conflict. In fact, there was one famous episode where she was attending a reception at the American ambassador's residence when we were living in Somalia. And she's going through the receiving line, and she found the ambassador so completely uninteresting that as she's shaking his hand, she turns her back on him to talk to someone else.
Did we have the same mother?
No.
I remember this story. I mean, my maternal grandmother was basically Granny Weatherwax from Terry Pratchett, so I'm seeing a pattern. This is actually a great time to go to break on It's Not Therapy. We're talking conflict styles, a multi-week series on conflict leading up to our Healthy Conflict workshop at the end of the month, June 25th at 1 p.m. You can go to nottherapyshow.com to get information, go to the ticket place, so on and so forth. It's online, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can attend. We'll continue talking conflict styles, our personal histories with conflict, with the Bubbleheads on It's Not Therapy after this quick break. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we are still talking our histories with conflict. The Bubbleheads are back. Before the break, Merryjest and Aquila were talking about their histories with conflict. Now, I paused, Aquila, before the break because my next question is probably going to require a long answer. With the social transitioning, did you find a change in the way people related to you in conflict when they were?
When you say social transition, you're referring to my current transition.
Yeah, like you don't change as a person, but the way the world reacts to you does. The expectations someone comes to the table with are different, right?
So this comes with a disclaimer.
Yeah.
Each individual trans person has a wildly different experience based on who they are, what they are, i.e. demographically, and so forth. Because of how I transitioned, I didn't start until my mid 40s, literally.
Mm-hmm.
So I had enough time to make peace with who I was. So when I started, it was all about the physical changes. I didn't want to change who I am. And that's come through. And some people find that grating and some people find it refreshing. I have found that people do react differently to me now that I'm presenting as female, particularly in photography spaces. There's a lot of people who no longer accept at face value my years of experience, which is annoying. Thankfully, I have the catalog and the career highlights to shut down any naysayers. But I have noticed that there are some people that don't want to accept me for who I am. I had an experience a month and a half ago where I was out and someone did not respect my own personal space. I had a guy take notice of one of my tattoos because I was wearing a low cut dress, and he comes over and points to it, and he's almost touching my boob.
Was he drunk?
No, he was stone cold sober.
Wow. That's is that normal? Like, I know certain, because you're in the South, I know certain things are a little bit touchy-feelier, but that's not normal, right?
It depends on who you get.
Okay.
Most Southerners will die on manners until it's time to not. But that was a first for me. I've noticed that I've gotten a couple of stares in public, but nothing that invades my bubble, which is kind of nice. Things are changing, I guess, as I'm perceived more and more female. I am noticing changes in behavior. So that's an answer that's still in progress.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the double whammy because you're biracial as well. That everybody's going to come to the table with a different pack of messed up attitudes about what that means.
Well, here's the thing. I am biracial. Visually, I'm coded Asian because I have high cheekbones, extremely almond eyes, and a rounded face. So I noticed growing up that people would say the racist things around me because they didn't think that I was Black. And that continued on into the military. One small skirmish that I had was during one sergeant major of the Army's crusade against tattoos. We had to catalog all tattoos.
Wow.
So here I am in the company office, and I have a Valknut on the right side of my chest. That was the tattoo that the other guy was pointing to. And the guy that was in charge of documenting the tattoos saw it and accused me of being in a white supremacist gang.
Because it's a Norse symbol.
Yes.
Unbelievable. Believable, but unbelievable. Yeah.
And then because I have drama masks on my left arm, he also accused me of being in a Latino gang.
Oh
so
my God.
He brought these competing accusations to the command team, and they looked at me, and they looked at him, and they laughed him out of the office. He was also a known racist.
Oh, great. So he was trying to show, haha, not just us.
Every accusation
is a confession.
Oh, yeah.
That's something people got to be careful when they're high conflict, too, is you give too much away.
Well, I was the high conflict person. He was trying to exert authority that he didn't have.
Right.
And he got what was coming to him.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like a story that ended in justice.
He had it coming.
He had it coming. He only had him. Okay, we don't want to get copyright hit. We can only do 4 seconds. La 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 la. Okay, Jake. Let's go over to the other full ginger. because only a ginger can call another ginger.
Oh, absolutely.
Bless Tim mention. Okay, so what you've got a similar and yet very different, that makes sense really, background. So I'll let you have the floor.
No worries. Well, I have a very similar type of mother as Aquila and Moz does as well, where I would when she gets mad. My mum is a patience of a saint, kind to a fault, but once you've pushed her button, she goes on. Well, to share a story of her rage, my mum is in a wheelchair full time, and generally speaking, she likes to be as independent as possible. They even have disabled shopping carts here, so they can strap onto wheelchairs and stuff like that. So she just needs to push rather than having to deal with stuff. The thing is my mom always brings a crutch with her if she ever needs to stand up for whatever particular reason. Someone moved her. She was having a horrible day. She didn't give them permission. They just grabbed the back of her wheelchair and moved her. And she slammed the crutch as hard as she could on the ground and went, "Oh, sorry. Did you forget I was here?" And she had snapped the metal crutch in half. And by that, I'm not entirely sure if people are catching on. This is one of those metal crutches that are segmented.
Mm-hmm.
So in the sense of they have two buttons that you press and stuff. She didn't pop that out. She broke it.
Wow.
Actually bent the metal till it snapped.
Yeah. The thing is as well, is that a person who's in a wheelchair has such strong upper body strength because they are continuously moving themselves that way. Also, they usually wear incredibly stupid high heels because they don't need to walk. That's my mom's favorite thing. All her heels are like 6-7 inches, just ridiculous.
Oh my God.
But
I love it.
Like, the thing is that she always taught me, and was always one of those things of, people are ignorant. That's not a crime. What is a crime is if they want to stay that way. So it's one of those, you give people a chance, but there's only so many chances you can give the general public before you need to make, some disabled people can be scary. Because as a carer and as somebody who witnesses this on a general basis, you do get very defensive, but you don't want to overstep your bounds. So it is one of those things for my disputes is it a fight worth having? And is it my fight to have? And that has been something that I had to learn very much, because yes, I am homosexual. Yes, I have a loving partner. Yes, I am a carer for my mum. But this does not mean that I need to pick every single fight for them. And it does not mean that every fight needs to be a fight. And a problem comes, for instance, people talk down to my mother, and she's this headstrong woman and she will refuse to let people do that. But I want to jump in and help. But it's not my place to help. And it would make it worse for her emotionally for me to do that, because then I'm talking down to her. And it's such a tightrope to walk, because my own emotions are valid in that situation, and I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But she still needs to handle it. And I'm sure everyone has kind of felt the same way, where you have somebody who's like, I want to fight this for you because I have many things to say, but it doesn't mean it's my place to say it. And the last thing I will just share, because my mom listened to the last podcast. She was so happy that she got Moss got to sing for me. Thank you very much for that. And all she said is she has a few selections for future podcasts that she was just for me to share with you at some point.
Hand me the list. I'll do them.
Mom's putting in requests.
Yes. And they're, put it this way, they're not exactly Christian rock, so she wasn't here in opera.
I will expect them.
Oh, I'm looking forward to hearing this when we wrap. Okay, so I have a bit of a different relationship with my parents. I talked about my grandmother, which we seem to see a common thing: strong women who don't terribly care about being nice. My mother and my sister are the exact opposite, and this was a real challenge for me growing up. My mom and my sister are very nice. They are very nice. I am not. And this is a real challenge regarding conflicts going up. You know, I was branded, and it's funny, I was a super shy kid, but I somehow managed to get branded aggressive because I was comparatively more assertive than any other girl in the area. The men could rant and rave and complain about politics and all that stuff. The minute I said anything remotely similar, it was, don't be negative. Now, from my perspective, and this is where the sort of assertiveness and cooperative axes come in. I found my mother and my sister completely passive aggressive. They'd do those things, you know, the heavy sighs, when they're doing something in the kitchen, or you hear them moving the dishes a little too loudly. And it's like, what's wrong? Nothing. I hate that. I hate that so much. Hate it, because it was always, now what? You knew they were mad at you for something. You knew there was an issue. And then when the more cooperative they tried to be because of that lack of assertion, the more it read as condescension to me. And then they were never happy. So the cycle of nothing, I'm so put upon, would continue. And I'd be like, can you just please say what you want? I don't know how to navigate this situation. Because I'm very much a person where I can't spend my entire life worrying if someone's mad at me. It's just, even back then, I was weird. It was drummed into me that I was weird. I was very used to, by the time I was like 9 years old, that I was not normal. Being a gifted kid who was also accelerated from grade 1 to 3 will do that to you, right? Not only was I a year younger than everyone, I stuck out like a sore thumb for being a ginger kid. And we didn't know what hypervisibility was back then. I just saw, you know, the black girls in my class got it. I got it too, for different reasons, but it was the same thing. If anybody was doing something in our vicinity that was bad, we'd get yelled at because somebody turned around and we were the first ones they saw, right? And they just sort of zeroed in on us. Even if we just been standing there, we didn't do anything. And so conflict became this really confusing thing to me as a kid, whereas there was really no way to win. And so for a lot of time, it was just say nothing until you have to say something and then assume it wasn't going to go well. So that idea of productive conflict wasn't something I really saw as an example until high school. And then I had some really great teachers who had to deal with my madman biological father. And I actually saw adults, unfortunately, they were all men. And this is where I got into trouble later, which is why I asked Aquila the question I did. But they set a pattern of how to deal, you know, keep your cool when somebody's coming at you and being, you know, bad crazy. And they actually found a way to solve problems, that sort of collaborative approach, without compromising too much. Little did I know that you get out into the world of work, you can't do it the same way as a woman. And I did not want to believe this was true. I hate this reality. But I would do, I had all male mentors because women were just out to get women lower than them. It's entertainment. It happens. But they'd be, do it this way. You're too passive. Do it this way. So I'd do it. And it would always be wrong. Oh, you were too this, you were too that, you were too this. I'd write copy for men that was assertive. I could say the exact same thing in the exact same tone and get a completely different reaction. And this was when I learned that conflict is much more art than science. And it's very much like stand-up comedy. You can do the exact same act in 2 different venues. You'll bring the house down on one, you'll bomb on another. And this is where I started developing my way of conflict and how to approach conflict. And we'll get to that after this break. I'm Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist on It's Not Therapy, talking to the Bubbleheads about conflict in support of our next workshop coming up at the end of the month, June 25th, 1 p.m. That's Sunday, June 25th, 1 p.m. online. It's totally online. So anywhere you are, you can attend. You can go to nottherapyshow.com, nottherapyshow.com for tickets. We'll be back with my approach to conflict, the beginning of it, after this break. Stay tuned. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I am Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking to the Bubbleheads. The Bubbleheads are back on It's Not Therapy because we got a workshop coming up Sunday, June 25th at 1 p.m. Tickets, nottherapyshow.com. And before the break, I teased into the beginnings of how to approach conflict in a more healthy way. So I want to talk a bit about assumptions going into conflict. And if you want more, if you like it, come to the workshop, please. They're a ton of fun. They're great. But I know when I've sat back and observed conflicts, or I go to, dissociative brain and kind of just looking at things dispassionately, a lot of the problems that lead to ugly conflicts as opposed to productive ones happen right at the beginning. And that stuff we bring into the room with us that is usually rooted in bad past experiences. I know for me, it's that, and this is something doing YouTube trained me out of, that idea that I was the small little rabbit in a room full of wolves, and I just had to fight to the death because otherwise they were going to devour me. And I didn't realize, and this sounds so stupid in retrospect, but when you're in it, you don't see it, right? Me behaving that way when I was just some nerd, probably accurate. Me behaving that way when I'd been on TV for 4 seasons and people had me in their living rooms every Friday, not the same shared assumptions. So let's go over to the other woman in the discussion. Although Jake's tiaras are absolutely lovely, but I'm talking about Aquila. Here comes the tiara. Aquila, have you found...
I want that tiara.
Jake is fancy. Aquila, have you found that assumptions, because I mean you deal with so many, what are some of those ones that you've found that sort of right off the bat it's like I have to try to turn this off or at least reduce it to a dull roar?
Like it's coming at me or how I respond to that?
Either.
Let me just kind of paint the picture of the things that will set me off.
Yeah.
Treating me as subservient or submissive.
Can relate. Yep.
It's socially, in most social circumstances, I try to play a little more neutral. I tend to be very assertive because, well, that was the model that I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sometimes on some things I have a really short fuse, so I have to watch that. On some things, they say something and it just doesn't land right, and it gets under my skin, it gets under my skin, and gets under my skin. And as it's doing that, I'm on an escalation slope. But in terms of like assumptions, presuming that I'm unknowledgeable or overly knowledgeable based on my appearance or presentation, that's a big one. I'm still sort of feeling everything out.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm only 2.5 years in to my transition, so I know it doesn't always look it, but I'm still very early on. I really didn't start going full time until late last year. I've been going full time for about 6 months. That's one of the things that I bring to the table that destabilizes me, is that my position in the world isn't as set and stable as it was 6 months, a year ago. So that's still a thing. I mean, I haven't even had this name legally for a year yet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's instability in the identity itself.
Mm-hmm.
So just to kind of put it in perspective, I used to be this guy named Duncan.
Mm-hmm.
And Duncan was exceptionally sure of himself. In transition, I lost that because I have to build an identity from scratch. Now, all of Duncan's coping mechanisms got brought forward, but they're sort of percolating in the backgrounds. So those survival mechanisms, which are very conflict forward, get triggered. I still have to let go of that identity and find a better footing with this identity.
That's gotta make it really difficult when things escalate quickly, because it's what's going on here? What does this mean? What am I supposed to do here?
Well, great example was the argument that I had with Moy just a couple of weeks ago. You know, there's a certain part of me, and I call him Sergeant Brennan, because he became fully formed or that facet, I should say, became fully formed when I was in the military. Establish fire superiority and go for the kill. And there were a whole host of contributing factors, but that was the aspect of my personality that I find most challenging as a woman to control.
Because the threshold for where it's acceptable is so much lower.
Right. That, and I'm genuinely trying not to be that guy, because I'm not that person anymore. I still have elements of him, but there has to be a separation. There has to be a new threshold established, and that's currently in flux.
That's a really interesting point. And I know if Moy was here, he'd be laughing hysterically right now. So just imagine him kind of laughing. We love you, Moy, so you can be here. Now, I realize that we're having this discussion with, 2 women and 2 gay men, both of which, and I won't speak for you guys. Jake will go to you first, but I know, having done a lot of LGBTQ plus outreach work when I was a lot younger, these 2 groups of people who both have that less perceived authority at baseline that Aquila mentioned.
Asher's nodding.
Asher's nodding. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I saw, we sort of triple teamed a dude because he did it to Asher on Twitter a little bit ago, because he just treated him like less, as an assumption. Now, Jake, I think we've talked about this, but have you noticed that as well?
With my background, and bearing in mind that I'm coming from Ireland when I'm talking about this, it's just solely in the sense of, if you're listening to this in Canada or America or wherever, we are about 10 to 15 years behind in most social cues and the way society has progressed. Even a case in point, a lot of people here, if you were to mention transgender or things along that line, they just look at you with a blank stare because they have no clue what you're talking about. It's not a lack of care, it's just a lack of knowledge. There's not a lot of it here. We still have a lot of drag shows for children, so pantomime and things like that here. May McFetridge is one of the biggest celebrities here, and it's a man by the name of, I can't remember his first name, but O'Donnell, and he's been doing it since like 1950s, and he still is the wicked stepmother in Cinderella and stuff. He's great. But anyway, so there's a lot of this here. And when it comes to the gay men and lesbians, the way it seemed to work is we picked the group that is attracted to the same gender that we are, and attached ourselves to them as a sort of safety thing,
Mhm.
because even if you are a man, when you're with a group of women, no matter what the case is, you feel safer, especially if you were to take 4 women and 4 men, put a gay person there in the middle, they would always lean towards the women for the
Right.
sole basis of there will be no misunderstanding of attraction, which may then lead to aggression.
Mhm.
The women, lesbians, from my understanding and from speaking to them, there's always this, I can't be near women because I know they're going to gossip about me. If I'm near men, at least they're going to say it to my face, but they are still too scared to try and hit me. A woman is willing to hit me.
That tracks.
Yeah. Now, whenever it comes to the mixing of gay and lesbian, it's very much, you'll never get the ends to meet. You'll never get the incredibly flamboyant, hi guys, how you doing? That sort of, sorry to be a stereotype, but you will never get someone like that communicating and being best friends with someone who's currently trying to carve a canoe out of a tree. It's just not going to work. I am being very overly stereotypical here.
Very specific example, and I did not expect that reference to come up. Okay, but that's it, because I mean, obviously, the trauma and the whole coming out thing, it's getting easier, but it's still rough, and that does leave people. I noticed that there's this minimization element with, you know, some, not all, gay men, that I know you've dealt with it a lot, Jake, that really, you know, I have to check the canoe carving part of myself when this comes up, because it is just an immediate, like, I just see red at it and I have to go, no, there's a reason for this. It is avoidant. It is lacking assertion, but there's a reason for it. It is a protective crouch. It is a defense mechanism. If it doesn't seem to bother me, they won't pick on me. They'll move on to somebody else. That's accurate. So
it is very accurate. But another thing that happens quite often now, and it's a lot of attempting to bypass dispute and kind of bringing a topic on hand when it comes to LGBT, people are actively going a way that is not helpful, which is where they are pushing people to come out to them in a form of, oh, I'm so accepting, you would be able to tell me if you want to, which actually does have a negative impact as well. As a form of, I don't want you to feel stressed to have the coming out process, when that is such a key part that people have built into the experience. It is one of those things, when you strip that away from somebody, when you try to make things better, but you have not fully really consulted with people of that group, and you're just doing something to improve a perceived issue, what you're actually leading towards is more than likely damaging in some aspect. I'm not going to speak for anybody else here, but I got outed. I never got to come out. Someone outed me. And it's always been a thing that I wish that I had been granted, solely because I never got to tell him in my own time. I came home one day after school, and my mom sat me down in the living room and went, you know, is this true? And I had to say yes. I was not prepared to say yes. And many other people have had so much worse. I didn't get kicked out of the house. There was silence in the house for a couple of days while people processed, but still wasn't great, and I still wish I had it. And it was a form, and when it comes to things that people don't seem to understand, it's always the weirdest form of, I want to confirm, but I'm not ready to hear the answer, but I want to know. And you're always just kind of left there going, you got the answer that you were looking for, and you didn't like it, and now you're angry at me. Why is this a thing?
Before we get to Merryjest, because I know he has thoughts, Aquila, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the reference of trying to carve a canoe from a tree.
Okay, we're going to take a break, explain the canoe carving reference to Aquila, and we'll come back with Merryjest talking assumptions and how they can make conflict go haywire on It's Not Therapy after the break. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner. I am not a therapist. We're back with the Bubbleheads, and during the break, We explained the carving a canoe out of a tree reference to Aquila.
That did not go where I thought it was going to go.
No, yeah, that we're talking healthy conflict. Laughter is healthy too. Okay, focus. So okay, Merryjest, a lot happened, and I know you have thoughts because I mean, I think you have a very unique experience with these sort of stereotypes because of the mix of stuff, and then you're a tenor. So I'll just let you run with it.
Oh gosh. So to start with stereotypes, I've always had a bit of a problem because I'm never really fully one thing or another. At least I don't exactly fit in one box or another. I don't usually hang out with opera people, for example, except maybe our friend Captain Coloratura, because she's not an idiot. And this is not saying that all opera singers are idiots, but there's a stereotype for a reason. As Anna Russell used to say, the only reason you have such a beautiful voice is because you got resonance where your brains ought to be. And that's because most opera singers only care about opera singing. They don't even listen most of the time to orchestral, classical, chamber music. Anything that doesn't have a voice, they don't listen to. And I'm the total opposite. I will listen to chamber music. I will listen to the weird composers, the unusual composers. I will go listen to Wendy Carlos, Jean-Jacques Perret, the fathers of electronic music, all of that stuff. I eat that up because I'm a nerd. And I'm also not a comics book fan because although I love comic books, and my first crush ever was Beast Boy as a kid. Again, I find a lot of comic book readers very, very limited in their scope of interest, and I have interests all over the place. The first time I ever wore a fursuit, we happened to be at a convention that was happening at the same time as a Baptist church's convention in the same hotel room. And no, this is amazing. It was a Black Baptist church, and they had the Fursuit Frolic, which was where everybody was dancing, and people from the Baptist church came in to dance with us.
That sounds right.
And we ended up at midnight dancing to You Make Me Want to Shout. And everybody was having a surreal but a very, very good time.
Okay, so we got way off the subject of conflict. It ended up being an accidental impromptu Pride episode. Merryjest, Aquila, Jake, thank you so much. Moi Moi was clearly here in spirit because this went nuts. If you want to join us for our Healthy Conflict Workshop and hear all the stuff we didn't get to this episode, go to nottherapyshow.com. You're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. See you next week.